Here is an update video of what I've been doing over the last 24 hours. Now I've generated the sine function, which you can see here. Now you don't need to bother about the point here that's slightly off in the middle. This is just the centre point of the screen, which I plotted separately. So it looks quite good and it's following the sine function quite well. So this has been generated via the floating point unit. And the floating point unit has generated good approximations to the value of the sine function. And then we've taken those values and we've changed them into simple integer values which can then be plotted. So there is an approximation involved whenever we go from the floating point value to the simple integer value. But this looks quite good, and you can see it's actually a screen plot of the final output. Now I will show you the other two here. So we should have down here the cosine. Whoa. So we've got the cosine function here, and again you can see it's worked out quite well. And finally we can have a look at the tan function. So this is the tan function here. So you can see that we are generating the trigonometric functions quite well. Now I did one other check, and that was I generated the sine squared plus cos squared. So sine squared plus cos squared should give you the value of 1, but then I multiplied it by 50 so that what we should get is a line at height 50 running all the way along here. Now I don't have a printout of that, but I did do that and it worked out very well, and with a single line running along the top. You'll notice here we've actually got a tiny little pixel up in the top left hand corner. Now just ignore that for the moment, it is meant to be there, but I will explain it at some other point during the course. Now I wanted to try one other thing. So the other thing I wanted to generate was a circle using parametric equations. So I was going to generate the cosine of an angle, which would give us the x coordinate of the circle, and then the sine of the angle, which gives us the y coordinate of the circle. And then we would do that for 100 points from the angle of 0 all the way round to 2 pi, and that should have generated the circle. Now I've created a program to do that, and it gave me complete and utter nonsense. So I spent a little bit of time messing about, and I think the actual program itself looks okay. And I did in fact find some other strange issue, which I will show you just in a moment. But I'll show you quite quickly the program for generating the circle. Okay, so the code begins at 0 cross 8000. We've got these equalities, so the plotting function for the floating points are it's called gr_f plot, and this is where it's held within the graphics library. And we've also got the floating point underscore sine, floating point underscore cosine, and these are held within the floating point library. Now the start of the program here is main. We're going to put in a value of the first angle, which is in radians, as a value of 0. Okay, so it's 0.0, and that will get into the index register, and we're going to count up from 0 up to 2 pi. So if we come down near the bottom of the code here, you can see here we're going to add a value. Now ignore that for the moment, that was just changed lately, but the value was something at 0.12578, something like this. Okay, so this would give us 100 points between 0 and 6.28. And then we would do a comparison to check and find whether we had indeed hit the 6.28. So whenever we've hit the 6.28, it would jump to the end of the program. So this is the end of the program here, and it would just end. Now, if we hadn't reached that value, it would then jump to the beginning of the loop. So this is the loop here. Okay, so we jump to the beginning of the loop here, and you can see here at the bottom as well, we're going to add on this value here. So this is the index plus a small amount. Okay, so that small amount would be added on, and when we come back up in here, we would be then picking the next angle in order to run through the code. So the code would be simply jump to subroutine float underscore cosine. Okay, so we generate the cosine of the angle, and then we would multiply it by 50, and then we would store that in the x coordinate. Okay, and then we would move the value for the index register back in, because we need to set it up again to start at 0 at the particular angle. And then we could jump to the subroutine float underscore sine, multiply it by 50, store it in the y coordinate. So now we've got the x coordinate and the y coordinate, and we could simply use the fplot command. Now the fplot here assumes that you've got the x coordinate in R0, so that's what we've done here. We load x coordinate into R0, we load the y coordinate into R1. We've got the colour, in this case is white, which is 0 cross FFFF, and that's in R2. We go through the process of changing from the float to the integer. So this is the new command here, fti R0 R1, and it will give us the output of the coordinate in the right format for the plotting. We go through the plotting and it plots out the point, and again we add on the value, and then it jumps round, and we go through the process over and over again. Now, as far as I was concerned, this actually should work, and I couldn't find anything wrong with it. So I started messing about with it, and I split it into a little section here. So you can see actually I've got a lot of this commented out. And to cut a long story short, I found that whenever I put the value, say 0 in here, and I jump to the cosine function, it came out with the right cosine of 0. So the cosine of 0 is 1. Okay, so it came out with that correct answer almost perfectly. I think it's 3C00 is a value of 1 in floating point arithmetic. But it came out with 3C03. Okay, so it's very close, just within fractions of a percentage. Okay. Now that value there would then sit in R0, and I would multiply it by 50. So I should have just got a value of 50 coming out sitting in R0, but I didn't get that. I get complete and utter nonsense coming out, and I'm not sure why. But whenever I got rid of this line here, I'll just get rid of it now. When I get rid of this line here and this line here, so this works fine. It gives us the correct cosine of the angle, but when we did the multiplication, it never worked. So what I did was, I just generated a value of 1. So I put a value of 1 just in here. So in effect, I just put in the data command, data, and I could say data hash, and it would be 1.0. Okay, and we pop that into R0. So now we force the register R0 to be this value of 1. And we forget about these. Okay, so really I'm just checking to make sure that the multiplication works. So when I did this, it multiplied it by 1 by 50, and it gave us the answer 50. Okay, so I'm in this strange situation where I can get each individual line working properly, but when I put the 3 lines together, it gives me nonsense. So I'm at the process at the moment trying to unravel why this is the case. And this is a typical sort of thing that I'll spend some time trying to unravel, you know, before I can actually go and get a course together. So this is practically the very last thing that I wanted to do. And after generating the sine, the cosine and the tangent, I thought that this would have been really straightforward, and I thought it would just work instantly because the sine, the cosine, the tangent worked perfectly fine, and I knew exactly what I was doing with it, and it worked exactly the way I was expecting it to. But this is just giving me utter nonsense. And there's nothing actually wrong with the code here. Okay, there's something wrong here just with this line, but there's actually something wrong with this multiplication. Okay, so it's a floating point multiplication following straight after the jump to subroutine float underscore cosine. Okay, so this should return a value into R0, which it does. It returns the correct value into R0. So then this function here should pick up that value in R0 and multiply it by 50, but it just doesn't do that. Now I've got things I can try. I can maybe take the output here from R0 and I could move it, say move R0 into R1, okay, and then do the multiplication here, something like 50 R1 and put it back into R0, okay. So I could do little things like that just to test it out, but I'm unsure exactly why this doesn't work. It should work, and in fact I've seen it in other parts of other code that I've written and it does work. Okay, so it's one of these awkward issues that I'm just having to mess about with to try and get a fix on it. So this is a typical sort of thing that I am working on, and that's all I've really got to talk about today. Nothing really that exciting, but it gives you an indication of some of the things I've been messing about with. But also, in the process of doing this, I have been watching Jeremy Clarkson's farm program, which I've found really enjoyable. I'm not really a big Jeremy Clarkson fan, but this farming program is utterly brilliant. I think it's fantastic, and I would recommend it in between doing some coding. So that's all for this video. Thank you for listening. I will hopefully get this fixed in the next hour or so. Goodbye.